Here we are today in beautiful Cyprus, and instead of just giving you a video of my hot sweaty face talking for 10 minutes, I'm going to give you the sea view because I wanted to talk about something today that I've been thinking about for the time that I've been here in Cyprus, because one of my goals of this journey in Cyprus is to visit some places which are alleged to have been towns or cities belonging to the Anatolian kingdom. And if you watch my class number 7 on Hittite language, the Hittites had a series of conflicts with the Anatolians, and generally this is a pretty interesting part of the world in terms of the historical perspective, from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age onwards. And so I was thinking about Cyprus and the Hittite connection. And one of the things that I've been reading about while I've been taking some time out and relaxing on the sunbeds or on the beach is the issue of Indo-Hittite, Proto-Indo-European, pre-Proto-Indo-European, and terms like this. So for those people who are unaware, Indo-Hittite is a proposed name for a language family that was, let's say, a step further back in time than Proto-Indo-European. And the reason that some linguists feel that this language categorization needs to be created is because there is a discussion about how well Anatolian languages fit in to Proto-Indo-European as a whole. And this comes down to the fact that there are some differences in Anatolian languages and other languages belonging to the Proto-Indo-European language family. And we're not really going to get into detail of the linguistics of it, but we will touch on it in a second. But I want to just talk about the whether it even has sense in creating this category at all, because there is no denial amongst linguists that Anatolian probably so there is discussion about how early Anatolian branched off, but most linguists are of a reasonable consensus, as far as you can get amongst linguists, that Anatolian broke off reasonably early. So we know that there was a period when there was the core group of, the remainder of Proto-Indo-European speakers, and Anatolian was not part of that. Nobody's denying that didn't occur. Well, again, with everything in linguistics, there will always be some people that deny everything. But the issue is, for me, is whether it makes sense that to take this period of time where Anatolian branched off at first and rename it as Proto-Indo-European, and name that point in time when Anatolian was part of the Indo-European language family fully as the Indo-Hittite language family. And I don't think this makes much sense, because all that we're doing is we're changing the definition of the adjectives that we use to describe these language families, because all through the history of every single Indo-European language, it's been in a period of motion and a period of flux. There is no one point in time where we can say that this is definitively, quintessentially, 100% pure as the driven snow Proto-Indo-European language. It was never like that. There were always dialects, and the language was always in a process of change. So when we take the group of languages that includes Anatolian and decide to rename it, or argue that we should rename it Indo-Hittite, we're doing nothing. There is no reason to do that. You could just call that group Proto-Indo-European and call the group of languages when Anatolian split off as late Proto-Indo-European. Or you could, I've seen some authors, for example, categorize the classification of Anatolian inside the Indo-European language family as archaic Proto-Indo-European. I think all of these works, archaic, Proto-Indo-European, late Proto-Indo-European, they all work. Indo-Hittite for me is just a nonsensical creation of an additional adjective that we don't really need. We can stick with Proto-Indo-European, and if we need to modify that adjective, put an appropriate modifier, archaic, late, early, whatever, and it makes sense for most readers engaging in the subject. Because for me, Indo-Hittite isn't clear that it precedes Proto-Indo-European. So that's my first issue, because I feel that the linguists that advocate the Indo-Hittite group just want to make a name for something, and I want to be associated with that, the creation of that name, instead of the fact that really they're just defining a very old, a very archaic version of Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European. So that's the first thing. Also, however, I think it's debatable, the argument that linguists give about whether Anatolian should be part of the Proto-Indo-European family grouping as a whole is because of certain differences that Anatolian has. The issue, I even have issue with this logic, because Anatolian, for anybody who has spent time outside of the Indo-European family tree and has been learning, studying, I don't know, the ancient Semitic languages or Far Eastern languages or whatever, taking a break from the Indo-European language family, will realise when they come back to the Indo-European language family and look at Anatolian that it looks very Indo-European. I think that this idea that Anatolian is somehow amazingly different from other Indo-European languages comes from the fact that we're kind of like focusing all of our attention on Indo-European languages, and we're picking up those differences more than we're picking up the similarities between them. Because I think for anybody that studies Indo-European languages, Anatolian looks like an Indo-European language. The three most common issues that people have about grouping the Anatolian languages in with Indo-European as a whole, and of course the Anatolian languages contain primarily the corpuses of Hittite and Luvian. I think that they are by far the two biggest corpuses of the Anatolian languages. There were other Anatolian languages for sure, but the corpus of those aren't as extent as Luvian, and by far Hittite has the largest corpus. And there was probably many Anatolian dialects and languages that we just don't have record of. But the main three reasons that people have issue with grouping Anatolian with the Indo-European languages are the fact that Anatolian doesn't have a dual number, which I would argue isn't necessarily true. I mean, if we're looking at late Hittite, then it definitely doesn't. But if you look at, but there is definite evidence in, I think, Hittite cuneiform, older forms of Hittite cuneiform. Again, I'm doing this video like on the fly on the beach, so I can't, quote research papers or anything. But I'm pretty sure if people were to Google dual in Hittite, you would see that there is evidence that the dual once existed. And I think, for the top of my head, it looks like dual number probably existed. You can see in Hittite, for example, that some nouns, when they're pluralized, kind of look as if it would have been a dual in earlier forms of the language. The other issue that people have is that Hittite only has two genders, whereas Indo-European typically has three. Again, that's not a convincing argument for me, because there's strong evidence that the Anatolian languages once did have the feminine gender. At some point it just merged into the masculine gender to create this kind of like common gender that we have in Anatolian languages. And the third issue, the big issue that people have, is with verb forms. Hittite has a relatively simplistic verbal system compared to other comparable Indo-European languages. Anatolian probably had and the argument is that because of Hittite, with this, Hittite only has two forms of the verb, no perfect aspect and things like this, that Anatolian probably look the same, and that Anatolian therefore is radically different from Indo-European that had a much more well-developed and complex tense system. Again, I don't necessarily follow this argument, because I think even if we just take Hittite as the example, there's a lot of evidence in the me versus he verbs in Hittite that this difference in these two conjugations probably once reflected an earlier difference between the present tense and the perfect tense. So for the three main arguments that people quote and keep quoting not to include Anatolian in the Indo-European language family, I think there are good arguments against those arguments, simply. And that people seem to overlook. I think Melchett has done a lot of work and discussion talking about why, you know, Anatolian probably should be categorized with other Indo-European languages, and Lehrman is not the first researcher, but one of the significant recent researchers that has advocated for Indo-Hittite and things like this. As far as I'm aware, you know, I'm not like, I don't have academic papers in front of me just to cross-reference everything, so I might add in the comments if I've said anything outrageously wrong in this video that I'm just doing off the top of my head. I think it's because I had 2 coffees at breakfast, and this sort of discussion kind of sometimes gets on my nerves, because I really don't see the point of not including Anatolian in the Indo-European language family. And another thing that I want to say is that when a lot of people talk about Anatolian, they're actually just talking about Hittite, because that's what we have the largest corpus for, or what we had the largest corpus for a very long time. Recently there's been a lot of work in understanding Luwian hieroglyphics, cuneiform, things like this, and so the corpus of Luwian and other Anatolian languages is expanding. And I think that when you look at Hittite in isolation as a representative for Anatolian languages, Hittite obviously being a much later form than Proto-Anatolian or the Anatolian language branch would have been, because obviously it's diverged in and of itself away from what that first group of speakers that diverged from the Indo-European dialect. We could call those early Anatolian speakers. Early Anatolian was radically different from Hittite. And you know, Hittite in and of itself, early forms, late forms, you know, like all languages, is constantly evolving and constantly changing. Hittite also, we have the issue with the fact that it was influenced by a substrate, influenced by languages surrounding it heavily, the Semitic languages, and you know, other language families that were situated close to the Hittite group of speakers, all influenced Hittite, all imparted their changes on the language, which again slowly, which does mean that Hittite, you know, does look a little bit funky in some regards. I would argue, however, that all daughter languages from Proto-Indo-European have their oddities. That's exactly what makes them languages in and of themselves and not part of some dialect continuum. So again, sorry if this is getting a bit ranty. So to summarize, Indo-Hittite is a proposed language family or classification of languages that was before Proto-Indo-European in time, and this Indo-Hittite includes the Anatolian language family. And in the Indo-Hittite theory, when we discuss Proto-Indo-European, we wouldn't include Anatolian inside that grouping, because it split off during the Indo-Hittite period and did its own thing. I don't think that that's the case. I think that we can include, that we don't need Indo-Hittite as a adjective at all, that we can just use archaic Proto-Indo-European or something like this, or just even Proto-Indo-European, because all languages are on a process of evolution and change. Not many people disagree that Anatolian didn't break early and wasn't one of the first, probably followed by Tocharian. Every single mathematical and many linguistic models I've seen seem to show that Hittite broke first, followed by Tocharian. So not Hittite, Anatolian broke first, followed by Tocharian. See, I made the same mistake then when I was talking about Anatolian language family. I slipped and said Hittite, because often in our heads when we think Anatolian we think Hittite. That in and of itself is wrong, and I've just made that mistake. So nobody's arguing, not many people are arguing that Hittite Anatolian languages didn't split first, and they subsequently evolved into their daughter languages, which includes Hittite, which you have the largest corpus for. Hittite was influenced by many non-Indo-European languages, does look a little bit different in some regards, as does many daughters of Indo-European. We don't need the term Indo-Hittite. We can use other terms. We can use Indo-European plus an additional modifier. Let's keep it clear for everybody. Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European was constantly in a process of change, and I think that the what Hittite did give us was confirmation of the laryngeal theory, which in my eyes means it kind of cements its place in Proto-Indo-European and the Proto-Indo-European language family. That's all from me. So obviously I'm taking a bit of a holiday now. I hope that this video was that you could hear what I'm ranting and raving about. Cyprus is beautiful, a magical part of the world, as is Turkey, as is the Near East in general. The world is a fantastic place to go out and visit, particularly if you love languages and history, which I do. I've spent a few days resting and relaxing now, contemplating Anatolian and Hittite and Old Irish and their places in the Indo-European language tree. I'm going to be looking forward to exploring the island for what it has. I want to try and see if we can find some old Greek inscriptions, and maybe even the I think it's the Creto-Cypriot syllabary or something like this, the language and writing system that they spoke in Cyprus pre Indo-European, pre-Semitic languages made their presence here. Although I'm reasonably sure that most of the artifacts that we have are probably in some other European museums somewhere, but still I'm going to go out and hunt. That's all from me for today. When I get back from holiday, I'll be back with class 8 of Learn Hittite. Hopefully I can do a little some more of these not particularly professional videos on my camera while I'm here in Cyprus, for people who haven't had the ability to explore Cyprus. Here, by the way, what I'm standing on, I guess they would have collected salt from here at some point in time, because you could still collect salt now by the looks of it. These salt pans all across this part of Cyprus where we are. Yeah, it's truly a beautiful place. We come here a few times because we like it so much from the perspective of relaxation and history and ruins and culture and people. Interesting geopolitical stuff as well, like you know, northern Cyprus and the British sovereign bases. Really fantastic place. If you don't know where to come on your holidays next year and you've never been to Cyprus, come here. A while down there they're constructing, I guess, a new beach. There seem to be, oh, I don't know what they're constructing, but I guess it's for a beach. They seem to be blocking off a bit of the seaway here. All the way down there is a place called Coral Bay Beach. We were there yesterday. Beautiful sand, crystal clear water. Me and the son went snorkeling. We hired a boat. It's really a great place to come and visit for rest and relaxation. I'll say goodbye. Keep learning Hittite, keep studying old languages, whatever floats your boat, Indo-European stuff, Semitic stuff, whatever. It's all interesting, it's all good. I'll speak to everybody soon. Bye bye.